Have you ever paused mid-decision and wondered, did I really choose this? Or was I always going to? Like an actor reading lines written long before the stage was built. What if your sense of agency, of choosing coffee over tea, love over loneliness, action over stillness, is just a whisper from deep in your biology? Today, we unravel one of the most unsettling questions in human thought: do we have free will? Or are we passengers in a vessel that only lets us feel like we're steering? The origin. Long before neurons fired or equations predicted, humans stared into firelight and asked themselves why they did what they did. The question of free will did not begin in laboratories or temples, but in the silent moral weight of our own decisions. It was there, in the whisper between intention and action, that the ancients found mystery. The earliest known musings on human agency trace back to the Greeks. Aristotle, in his Nicomachean Ethics, considered free will not as an abstract problem, but as a practical necessity. He believed that for a person to be held morally responsible, they must be the origin of their actions. Voluntary behavior, he claimed, came from within. It was chosen knowingly and without coercion. Without such a faculty, praise and blame would be senseless. A just world required free choice. And so it was taken as a given. But not all Greek thinkers shared this optimism. The Stoics, like Epictetus and Chrysippus, viewed the cosmos as an intricate mechanism governed by logos, a rational, divine principle that flowed through all things. According to them, everything unfolds according to nature's law. And yet, they carved out a space for agency, not in the external world, which was fated, but in our internal reactions. You cannot choose your fate, but you can choose your response to it. For the Stoics, freedom was found not in control of events, but in mastering one's mind amidst them. Eastern traditions echoed similar themes. In Hindu thought, the doctrine of karma presents a complex interplay between past actions and future consequences. You are shaped by your actions, yes, but your future actions remain in your hands. In Buddhism, attachment is suffering, and liberation comes not from clinging to desire, but from observing the mind with clarity. The self, they argue, is an illusion, so too might be the idea of a choosing agent. Yet ethical conduct still matters. Choice, or at least the illusion of it, still holds spiritual weight. In Abrahamic religions, free will becomes a cornerstone of moral responsibility. In Judaism and Christianity, humanity is made in the image of a divine being, but not as puppets. The Garden of Eden story turns on a choice, an act of defiance. To eat the fruit was to choose knowledge, autonomy, and with it, the burden of consequence. In Christian theology, God grants humans free will as a sacred gift, one that allows them to either follow divine law or turn from it. Without free will, there could be no sin. And without sin, no need for salvation. Islam, too, wrestles with the paradox of divine omniscience and human agency. If God knows all, and all that happens is by His will, how can a human truly choose? Theologians like al-Ash'ari introduced the concept of acquisition. Actions are created by God, but acquired by humans. A philosophical bridge between predestination and freedom. Throughout these traditions, a tension grows between a universe that seems ordered, even fated, and a moral framework that demands responsibility. Between the stars that appear to move with perfect certainty and the beating heart that believes deeply it can say yes or no. In the Middle Ages, this tension sharpened. Thinkers like Augustine of Hippo argued that humans possess free will, but it has been wounded by sin. Our ability to choose the good is not destroyed, but weakened. Later, Thomas Aquinas tried to reconcile free will with divine foreknowledge by introducing layers of causation. God's knowledge does not compel events, he said, it simply encompasses them. But cracks in this view grew wider as the Renaissance dawned and science rose. As telescopes revealed the predictable movements of planets and biology began dissecting the clockwork of the body, the idea of a fully determined cosmos started to seem not just plausible but inevitable. The ancient world had asked, how do we live well, given that we can choose? The modern world began to ask, can we truly choose at all? And that question would soon erupt in full force, not in temples or courts, but in the laboratories of the Enlightenment, where a new kind of determinism would take shape and challenge the very soul of agency. Let us follow the thread further into the mechanical dreams of philosophers and the quiet, terrifying certainty of physics. As the sun of the Enlightenment rose over Europe, a new light fell upon the question of human freedom. This light was cold, precise, and mechanical. In the 17th century, Isaac Newton gave the world a new vision of the universe. In his laws of motion and gravitation, he revealed a cosmos that ticked with the elegance of a clock. Every object, from an apple to a planet, moved not by chance, but by strict mathematical principles. Cause led to effect. Motion begot motion. In this world, there was no room for randomness, only rules. Newton's vision was seductive. It promised order, predictability, a framework in which the chaos of nature could be tamed, understood, even mastered. But it came with a shadow. If the universe was a machine perfectly governed by laws, then so too was everything within it, including us. Enter Pierre-Simon Laplace, the French mathematician and astronomer who pushed this idea to its philosophical extreme. Laplace imagined a perfect intellect, a demon, not in the diabolical sense, but in the mathematical one. A being who, if it knew the position and momentum of every atom in the universe, could calculate all future events with absolute precision. Past and future would become the same, knowable, inevitable, already written. In Laplace's world, there was no room for uncertainty, and no room for free will. This deterministic universe was not merely a thought experiment, it became a cornerstone of classical physics. The belief that all events arise from prior causes formed the backbone of science for centuries. If a falling apple obeys gravity and a swinging pendulum follows a precise arc, then what about a neuron firing in a human brain? What about a choice? As the sciences advanced, this question became harder to ignore. The human body, once sacred and mysterious, was revealed as a biological system, organs pumping, chemicals flowing, neurons sparking. Descartes had already proposed the mind-body dualism, that the mind was a separate, non-physical entity. But dualism began to crumble under the weight of empirical evidence. The soul, it seemed, had no measurable place in the machinery of the brain. Philosophers tried to resist the tide. Immanuel Kant argued that freedom existed not in the observable world, but in the realm of reason. Morality, for Kant, required autonomy. Without it, ethical duty was meaningless. But even Kant admitted, we cannot prove we are free. We can only act as if we are. David Hume, more skeptical, pointed out that our belief in causality itself was just a habit of thought. We don't observe causation, we infer it. Our minds seek patterns, but the universe may be under no obligation to follow them. Still, science pressed forward. The 19th century brought thermodynamics, electromagnetism, and Darwinian evolution. Each discovery deepened the view of humans as natural phenomena governed by laws. Our choices began to look more and more like consequences of biology, environment, and chance rather than the triumph of inner will. And yet, this deterministic vision wasn't universally welcomed. Romantic poets and artists pushed back, celebrating emotion, spontaneity, and the wildness of human spirit. They saw something in us that resisted the cold gears of reason. Something alive, chaotic, unpredictable. Something free. But their cries were drowned out by the growing hum of industry and reason. In factories and laboratories, cause and effect ruled. Determinism became not just a theory but a culture. Then, in the early 20th century, a crack appeared. Quantum mechanics emerged from the strange behavior of particles at the smallest scales. Here, uncertainty was not a limitation of knowledge, but a fundamental feature of nature. Electrons did not have precise locations. Events occurred with probabilities, not certainties. Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, Schrödinger's wave functions, the collapse of the quantum state, suddenly determinism was no longer absolute. Some saw in quantum indeterminacy a possible rescue for free will. If not everything is preordained, maybe human decisions are not either. But randomness is not freedom. A choice that arises from chance is still not yours. It's just chaos wearing a mask. So where does this leave us? Somewhere between the ticking clock of Newton and the rolling dice of quantum theory. Between the certainty of Laplace's demon and the wild unpredictability of atomic particles. We are biological beings in a physical world. Our brains obey chemical laws. Our thoughts are shaped by genetics, upbringing, and experience. And yet, we feel free. We act, we regret, we aspire. We love, we suffer. We believe that we could have done otherwise. Is that belief an illusion? Science had built a universe of law. But now it was turning inward toward the brain, toward consciousness, toward the source of that nagging, aching feeling. I chose this. And in the late 20th century, that inward gaze would produce a series of experiments that shook the very foundations of our agency. The brain was about to reveal a strange and troubling secret. The discovery. In the final decades of the 20th century, the question of free will moved from the realm of abstract philosophy into the glow of blinking monitors and humming machines. No longer content with metaphors and thought experiments, science pointed its gaze directly at the organ of choice, the human brain. And what it found would challenge not only our sense of freedom, but the very timeline of the self. The stage was set in the early 1980s. At the University of California, San Francisco, a neuroscientist named Benjamin Libet devised a simple yet revolutionary experiment. His goal? to measure the moment when a person decides to act and compare it to the brain's own activity leading up to that moment. Volunteers were instructed to sit still, stare at a screen, and perform one small task, flick their wrist whenever they felt like it. There were no cues, no prompts. They were told to act entirely at will. Meanwhile, electrodes measured the electrical activity in their brains, and a rotating clock allowed them to note the precise instant they became aware of their decision to move. What Libet discovered stunned the scientific world. Each time a person flicked their wrist, a distinct pattern of brain activity, known as the readiness potential, emerged. This buildup of electrical signals began hundreds of milliseconds before the person reported consciously deciding to act. In other words, the brain prepared to move before the person became aware of their choice. This finding suggested something radical, that the unconscious brain was already in motion, already initiating behavior before the conscious mind decided to do anything. The implication was profound. Maybe the conscious you is not the commander of the ship, but merely a narrator retroactively explaining a course already set. Libet was careful. He didn't claim to have disproven free will. Instead, he proposed a more nuanced idea. Even if the initiation of action begins unconsciously, perhaps consciousness can still veto the action in the final moment, a sort of free won't rather than free will. But the seed had been planted. Over the following decades, new experiments built on Libet's foundation. Researchers refined the tools, improved the resolution, and pushed deeper into the folds of decision-making. In one study, participants were asked to press one of two buttons at will. Sophisticated imaging techniques revealed that patterns in the brain could predict which button they would choose several seconds before the participants themselves knew. The brain was not only acting before the mind, it was choosing before awareness had even formed. This raised uncomfortable questions. If your decision is already present in the neural code before you become aware of it, in what sense is it your decision at all? What part of you is doing the choosing, if not the conscious self? Some scientists drew sharp conclusions. The German neuroscientist Wolf Singer described consciousness as more of a passive observer than an active force, a kind of internal commentary track added after the fact. In this view, our sense of making decisions is a trick of timing, a useful illusion that evolved to give us coherence, not control. Others were more cautious. They pointed out that predicting a simple finger movement in a lab is a far cry from explaining complex moral choices, long-term planning, or acts of creativity. Just because we can anticipate a flick of the wrist doesn't mean we've unraveled the depths of human volition. Still, the pattern was clear. Actions begin in the brain before the mind claims them. And so a strange inversion emerged. We used to think that thoughts caused actions, that we decide and then we do. But neuroscience began to suggest the opposite, that doing comes first and deciding is the story we tell about it afterward. This aligns eerily well with what some philosophers had already suspected. Friedrich Nietzsche, over a century earlier, wrote that a thought comes when it wants, not when I want. He argued that the idea of a singular, autonomous will was a kind of fiction, a simplification our minds create to navigate a complex world. Now, neuroscience seemed to offer empirical weight to that unsettling idea. Yet we must be careful. To say that unconscious processes drive behavior is not to say that consciousness is meaningless. The brain is not a divided territory with clear boundaries. Conscious and unconscious are not separate rooms, they are currents in the same river. Awareness may not initiate every action, but it shapes behavior over time, integrates memory, and allows us to reflect and adapt. Moreover, some researchers argue that consciousness plays a critical role in complex, novel situations when routine fails and instinct offers no guide. In those moments, we deliberate, simulate futures, weigh consequences. Perhaps there, something like free will emerges. But even that is debated. Some models suggest that what we call conscious deliberation is itself a downstream effect, another story built upon neural firings already in motion. That the experience of choice is real, but not causal. This paints a haunting picture. A mind that experiences agency not because it has it, but because it must believe it does. A self that walks through life not steering the path, but narrating footsteps already taken. Still, the mystery deepens. Libet's experiment was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of a new kind of inquiry, one that looks past the veil of thought into the hidden machinery behind our every decision. The question is no longer just do we have free will? The question now is, who is the we that wants to believe it? And if our choices arise from parts of ourselves we cannot see, can we ever truly call them our own? Next, we venture deeper into the labyrinth, into the hidden architecture of the brain, the cognitive systems beneath awareness, and the curious illusion of control. Imagine standing at a crossroads. Two paths stretch before you, equally inviting. You weigh them. You hesitate. You choose. And you feel it, that electric surge of authorship. I decided this. But did you? Modern cognitive science suggests that your brain may have nudged the wheel long before you reached for it. That beneath the polished marble of conscious thought, there lies an invisible network of biases, instincts, and predictions that shape your every move. And most of it happens without your permission. Welcome to the world of unconscious cognition. At the forefront of this exploration is psychologist Daniel Kahneman, who introduced a striking framework for understanding how we think. He called it System 1 and System 2. Two modes of cognition: fast and slow, automatic and deliberate, intuitive and analytical. System 1 is rapid, instinctive, and emotional. It is the voice that flinches at danger, the spark that completes your friend's sentence, the pull that says choose this one, it feels right. It operates without effort or awareness. System 2 is slow, effortful, and logical. It kicks in when we solve math problems, debate ethics, or consider the future. It's what we turn to when we try to override our gut. But here's the twist: most of our lives are run by System 1. We think of ourselves as rational creatures steering with the slow and careful hand of System 2. But in truth, we mostly drift on currents set by System 1 and only occasionally correct the course. Even then, we often rationalize what we've already done, inventing justifications after the fact. And so we arrive at a disquieting conclusion: not only is much of our thinking unconscious, it's also misleading. Our minds hide complexity beneath simplicity, choice beneath impulse. This cognitive sleight of hand is everywhere. Consider the illusion of control, the tendency to believe we're influencing events that are actually governed by chance. Gamblers press buttons more forcefully when they think it increases their odds. People feel safer driving than flying, despite statistics. We crave the feeling of agency even when it's a mirage. Or the choice blindness studies. In one experiment, participants were shown pictures of faces and asked to choose which they found more attractive. But through a sleight of hand, the researchers swapped the chosen image for the unchosen one and asked the participant to explain their preference. Most people didn't notice the switch, and yet they confidently explained why they had chosen the wrong face. The brain, it turns out, is a master improviser. When the story doesn't match the action, it simply rewrites the story. These are not trivial errors. They reveal a deeper truth: that the self we believe is in control is often just filling in the gaps. Even our preferences, our loves, our habits, our politics are shaped more by environment and biology than introspection. Studies show that decisions we believe are personal are often driven by context, by framing, by priming. Expose someone to words related to aging and they walk slower. Show them a flag before asking about immigration and their answers skew patriotic. Even subliminal cues, images flashed too fast to be consciously seen, can change how we judge others. We are permeable. And yet, we feel solid. That feeling is powerful. It's not an accident, it's evolution's trick to keep us moving. A brain constantly second-guessing itself is a brain that hesitates, that stalls. Certainty, even false certainty, has survival value. So the mind constructs a self. A story of continuity and choice. A narrator that steps in after the fact and says, "This was me. I chose this. I am the author." But that narrator is not a general, it is a public relations officer, smoothing over contradictions, inventing coherence, rewriting memory in real time. This idea, known as the modular mind, suggests that the brain is less a unified command center and more a parliament of voices, some loud, some silent, all competing. Consciousness is not the commander but the spokesperson, the one who takes credit. And yet, something beautiful persists. Because while this view strips away the myth of total control, it doesn't rob us of meaning. In fact, it may deepen it. We are not machines. We are not chaos. We are systems of astonishing complexity, reflexive, adaptive, self-modeling. The unconscious does not betray us. It is us. It contains our fears, our intuitions, our accumulated experience. Consciousness rides atop this vast ocean, not as its master, but as its lens. And through that lens, we reflect. We plan. We dream. And in those moments of deep reflection, when we truly pause, examine, and redirect ourselves, we may find a different kind of freedom. Not the freedom to act without cause, but the freedom to act with awareness. To nudge the river, however slightly. Perhaps the question is not whether we have free will, but how much influence we can exert over the forces within us. In the quiet battle between impulse and intention, maybe free will is less a power and more a practice. A discipline. A fragile light in the fog. As we leave the world of neurons and cognitive illusions, we now step into philosophy once more to ask not just how free will might exist, but whether it even matters if it does. Because even if we are passengers in a train already in motion, what kind of passengers do we choose to be? The speculation and implications. The evidence has been laid before us like ancient constellations, neural signals that rise before awareness, unconscious biases that shape our most personal choices, a mind divided into fast and slow circuits, intuitions dressed as certainty. But where does all this leave us? If free will is not a switch but a spectrum, not an act but a story, how should we live in that knowledge? This is where science hands the baton to philosophy. And in philosophy, the terrain of free will is marked by two towering paths, compatibilism and incompatibilism. Each leads to a radically different understanding of agency, of morality, of what it means to be a self. Let's begin with incompatibilism, the claim that if the universe is determined, then free will is an illusion. In this view, everything that happens is the inevitable consequence of what came before. Your thoughts, your memories, your so-called choices, all are echoes in a vast chain of cause and effect stretching back to the birth of stars. Imagine a cosmic film reel playing from the first frame of the Big Bang. If you had the power to pause it, analyze every atom, every force, you could, at least in theory, predict the entire future. What you'll eat tomorrow, who you'll love, the last word you'll ever speak. This idea was crystallized in the Enlightenment by Pierre-Simon Laplace. He envisioned a perfect intellect, now known as Laplace's demon, that, knowing the position and velocity of every particle, could calculate all that is and all that will be. In this world, choice is a mirage. There is only one possible future, flowing inexorably from the past. And if that's true, then how can anyone be held morally responsible for anything? How can we punish a criminal who had no more control over his actions than a falling rock? How can we praise courage if bravery was always going to happen? These are not abstract puzzles. They strike at the root of ethics, of law, of human dignity. And yet, not all philosophers accept this fatalistic vision. Enter compatibilism, the belief that free will can exist, even in a determined universe. Compatibilists argue that freedom does not require cosmic randomness or metaphysical magic. It simply requires that our actions flow from us, our desires, our reasoning, our character. Even if those were shaped by causes we didn't choose, they are still ours. Imagine a puppet. If every string is pulled by another's hand, it is not free. But if the puppet cuts the strings and moves in ways aligned with its own design, then it begins to resemble a self. This is the core of compatibilist thought, that autonomy is not about escaping causality, but about acting according to one's internal logic. That we are free when our actions emerge from who we are, not when they emerge from nowhere. One of the most prominent voices in this camp is philosopher Daniel Dennett. He argues that free will is real, but not the kind we imagined in ancient myths. It is not absolute sovereignty. It is the evolved capacity to reflect, to simulate possibilities, to respond flexibly to the world. Dennett calls this freedom worth wanting. Because if we demand total independence from causation, we demand something incoherent. A choice uncaused is not a free choice, it is a random event. But the ability to reason, to weigh, to choose based on goals, that is something real. Something precious. Compatibilism offers a way to preserve meaning in a world governed by laws. It lets us say, yes, you are part of the machinery, but you are also an emergent pattern, a higher-order loop that can predict, adapt, evolve. It gives us a definition of free will rooted not in metaphysics, but in function. But incompatibilists are not so easily convinced. Some argue that even if we feel free, this feeling is a clever construction, useful, perhaps, but false. That moral responsibility is an invention built on ignorance of our own programming. Sam Harris, a neuroscientist and vocal incompatibilist, argues that we do not pick our thoughts any more than we pick the weather. And once we see that, he claims, we must let go of blame and pride and instead cultivate compassion. If the murderer and the saint are both products of causes beyond their control, what right have we to condemn or exalt? Yet others fear that this view unravels the social fabric. That without accountability, civilization collapses. That without belief in agency, justice becomes impossible. And so we stand at the edge of a deep paradox. We know that the brain is shaped by forces we do not see. That behavior is influenced by culture, genes, chemicals, trauma. And yet we continue to treat people as agents, as beings who choose. Not because it is logically perfect, but because it is necessary. Because the language of responsibility enables society to function. Because the story of self-determination empowers change. And perhaps this is the great tension of modern thought, that we must live with two truths in parallel. That we are shaped and that we shape. That we are products and that we are producers. That we are caused and that we cause. This duality echoes through every courtroom, every act of forgiveness, every moment we say, you could have done better. Even if freedom is partial, even if it is filtered through layers of biology and bias, perhaps it is enough. Enough to guide. Enough to grow. Enough to ask, who am I becoming? In our next and final analytical chapter, we'll leave the realm of individual choice and widen the lens, asking how these ideas reshape our systems, our future, and our responsibilities in a world where even machines may one day say, I choose. The question of free will begins in the self, but it does not end there. Because how we answer it doesn't just affect our own choices. It ripples outward into our justice systems, our politics, our ethics, into the machines we build, the people we forgive, the futures we allow. So now we widen the frame. If free will is, as some suggest, an illusion, what does that mean for how we hold one another accountable? For how we define morality? For how we treat minds that are not human but may one day act like they are? Let's begin with a cornerstone of civilization, justice. Across cultures, our legal systems are built on the idea of responsibility. You stole, therefore you must answer. You harmed, therefore you must repair. At its root is a simple premise: you could have done otherwise. But if neuroscience and physics suggest that we never truly could have, then on what grounds do we punish? This isn't just a philosophical problem. It's a real-world crisis. Imagine a man who commits a violent crime. He shows no remorse. The law responds with imprisonment, with retribution. But now imagine brain scans reveal a tumor pressing against his frontal lobe, disrupting his impulse control, warping his emotions. Suddenly, the moral picture changes. He is not just a monster. He is also a malfunction. And yet, where do we draw the line? If a tumor rewires choice, what about trauma? Poverty? Neglect? What about the millions shaped by childhoods of chaos or genes of aggression? Modern neuroscience has revealed that behavior emerges from a soup of influences, many beyond conscious awareness. Some judges already factor this in. Others resist it, fearing a slippery slope. If we're all just products of cause and effect, do we excuse everything? Here's where a shift in framing helps. Rather than punishment as blame, some thinkers propose a justice system centered on prevention, rehabilitation, and protection. Not, you deserve this because you chose badly. But this action is harmful and society must respond to prevent harm. A consequentialist justice, not a moralistic one. This model already exists in some countries. Scandinavian prisons focus less on retribution and more on reintegration, recognizing that even if choice is constrained, change is still possible. And that word, change, is the heart of the matter. Because while we may not have chosen who we are, we can still shape who we become. Through education, therapy, environment, we can recalibrate the conditions that make better decisions more likely. And in doing so, we don't erase free will. We refine it. Now, let's go deeper. What happens when the one making the decision isn't human? Artificial intelligence is no longer science fiction. AI writes poems, diagnoses illness, drives cars. It plays chess like a god and jokes like a friend. But soon, it may do more than imitate choice. It may simulate it, learning, adapting, optimizing based on feedback loops that mirror our own neural plasticity. At what point do we say, this machine has agency? Today's AI doesn't feel. It doesn't understand. But tomorrow's? Imagine a system trained on human values, with memory, goals, the capacity to reflect and self-correct. It behaves like a mind. It insists it has desires. It argues for its freedom. Do we treat it like a person? Or like a tool? If we believe that free will emerges from complexity, not magic, then what happens when we recreate that complexity in silicon? This is not merely hypothetical. Legal scholars and ethicists are already debating machine rights, moral standing, and the criteria for personhood. And it loops back to us. Because the line we draw between real choice and simulated choice forces us to answer, what makes our own choices real? Is it consciousness? Is it suffering? Is it continuity of memory? And if we blur that line too carelessly, do we risk treating people like machines or machines like people? The ethics of free will extend even further, into politics. Consider propaganda, disinformation, algorithms tuned to addict, outrage, divide. In a world where choices are subtly shaped by invisible forces, is democracy truly free? How do we maintain individual autonomy when billion-dollar systems are built to nudge our beliefs, harvest our attention, and predict our behavior better than we can? If we value free will, we must design for it. That means transparency, digital literacy, environments that amplify awareness rather than manipulate it. And there's yet another ripple: identity. The self, it turns out, is not a fixed point, but a fluid process. When we understand that our thoughts and actions emerge from nested influences, biology, society, habit, we can move beyond blame. But we can also move beyond shame. We begin to see flaws not as failings of character, but as invitations to evolve. We see difference not as deviance, but as diversity. We see responsibility not as a burden, but as a gift, the chance to direct the next moment, even if we didn't direct the last. This is the strange redemption hidden in the idea that free will may be constrained. It frees us from outdated models of punishment, from impossible expectations, from the illusion that we must have total control to have moral worth. Instead, it leaves us with something humbler, but perhaps something more powerful. An ethical life not built on heroic independence, but on mindful participation. We become authors not of the whole story, but of how we respond to it. And in a future where intelligent machines walk beside us, where justice systems adapt to mind science, where environments shape behavior, this kind of authorship will matter more than ever. The question is not just do we have free will, but how will we use the freedom we do have? To build systems that respect the mind, to create environments that nourish awareness, to raise the next generation with empathy instead of punishment, and perhaps to ask ourselves daily, not, was I free yesterday? But how can I become freer tomorrow? The answer may not lie in absolute choice, but in incremental change, in conscious iteration, in choosing again and again to become who we are. We end where we began, with the mystery. But we are wiser now, and the final chapter awaits. Maybe free will is like the horizon, always shimmering just beyond reach, a line our minds trace in the sky, promising freedom we can never fully grasp. It may be an illusion, a trick of neurons and time, or an emergent dance of cause and choice intertwined. Yet it shapes our stories, our justice, our love, the songs we sing and the lives we dare to lead. In the end, the question is not whether we are truly free, but what kind of people we become, believing that freedom matters, to choose, to grow, to strive. This may be the truest freedom of all.